Sebastian Stan is one of the most versatile movie stars working today. In 2011, he officially joined the Marvel Cinematic Universe as Bucky Barnes, better known as the Winter Soldier, a role he's returned to 9 times and counting. In between his franchise blockbuster work, Stan has proven himself a ferocious character actor, putting in scene-stealing performances in I, Tonya, Destroyer, the cannibal thriller Fresh, and as real-life rocker Tommy Lee in Hulu's Pam and Tommy. Here is the great Sebastian Stan. How are you doing? How's it going today, sir?
Good. How are you?
Good. It's such a pleasure to have you here, and it is especially a pleasure personally for me because this is the first time I've ever had to host a fellow Rutgers alum. So welcome. I am currently broadcasting from New Jersey as we speak.
No way. Wow. New Brunswick?
I'm not in New Brunswick now, but I am from New Brunswick. So I basically grew up on Rutgers campus. I was just there actually because my parents live in New Brunswick, and it's kind of crazy. It looks almost like a real school these days. There's new buildings and new clock towers and all that.
It's a great place, great experience. Definitely shaped a lot of my path, I guess you could say.
This is the Backstage podcast. I can't wait to talk about all the current projects, Pam and Tommy, and everything after that. But we do love the journey. We love how you got here. And I guess since that's where we are, we can start there because not everyone goes the collegiate academic path. So I'm wondering for you, when you think back on that time, when you think back on New Brunswick, New Jersey, what is that sort of kernel of pure acting school advice that was true? That is still to this day sort of, you're like, okay, yeah, I learned that in school and it's still helping me all these years later.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a bunch, but for time purposes, the first thing that comes to mind was Israel Hicks, who unfortunately has passed, who was he was the head of the program there, the acting program, has said this great piece of advice I never forgot, which is always bring the day with you to work or to the audition or to the meeting. And it sounds sort of simple kind of, but because it's just sort of this acknowledgement that as you're in pursuit of a job or you are working on a job or a character or you are trying to get a job, you're making an impression, whatever, no matter what, life is just always happening and things are happening to you on the day of that performance or on the day of that audition or that meeting. And sometimes it's better to acknowledge whatever it is that's going on. The best example he had was you're on the subway, you're running late, you're trying to get to the audition, and then someone bumps into you and you spill coffee on you and you're pissed off. And then you get to the audition and you're there to get the job, make the impression. Well, you might as well just own it and own the day and go in with it. And maybe something, at least then you're starting from a place from an honest place, as opposed to maybe driving an agenda, so to speak, that you might have had the night before of how you were going to do this particular scene or the impression you were going to leave, because things just shift constantly. You don't have control over that. And that I feel like is really applicable always. For me, it was in terms of starting a new job or just going in the next morning to work on a scene with a partner. You make decisions, you make a plan, but then you have to just kind of stay open to everything that's coming at you, whether it's your own experience or what the other people are bringing, or maybe you didn't get a lot of sleep that night. So it's all sort of, the more you acknowledge what the actual truth is, then you're at ground zero and then you can actually start somewhere.
Is that something that, that you realized when it was said to you, you're like, wow, that is super helpful? Or is that something that later on you, through experience, you're like, oh, that is true? Is it something that you learned and then had to learn to experience?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, because a lot of what I've learned in college was further cemented through experience. I think sometimes it's very difficult when you're studying, when you're going to college, you're studying acting, and you're 20, 19, 20, 21, you're learning a lot at a very fast pace, and it's only in application that sort of all that work kind of ends up sort of simmering down. And there are things that I learned at Mason Gross that I think made sense to me fully 10 years later. And sometimes when you're younger, you're so obsessed with trying to get it right. And I think it's very difficult with this particular, with anything artistic or creative, to kind of approach it from a right, wrong, result oriented kind of approach, because it can be very limiting. Because I do think sometimes it's just sort of making yourself available for accidents, miracles, you sort of call them, things you haven't planned that can give you a genuine response and elicit honest behavior, because then you're not just sort of driving an agenda into the thing. You're just not open to anything happening in the moment. So, but to answer your question, I do think that's just something that gets better and better as the older that the older, the more experience that you have, at least for me.
Yeah. And it, you mentioned that the plan probably never quite works out the way you think it does. I'm curious, when you do you have sort of an acting origin story where your earliest memory where you're like, oh, that's acting, and like that's what I would like to be doing?
Yeah, well, that was a lot of that was when I was in high school. I remember I worked on Little Shop of Horrors was like the first thing I ever worked on.
Yeah.
And I just remember that experience of, you're on stage and you're doing something, and then you hear the audience respond to what you're doing, and sort of, you've made them laugh, and there's a reaction, and there's this weird thing then that happens, that immediate back and forth, where you actually feel almost like a sixth sense that you have the audience's attention, and they're paying attention to what you're doing, and it sort of influences your behavior, and then your behavior passes to them, and they respond, and you send back, and like this cycle like is really very special. And I just remember feeling that kind of on that was when I was I think a sophomore in high school or something, and feeling really fulfilled by it, feeling really kind of, in a sense, being in some kind of dream state or something, where you were present but not at the same time aware of all these other things. And I was like, oh, this is cool. This is addictive.
This is something I could do for the rest of my life. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I didn't really know that then. I was very lucky in a lot of ways, because I went to a great theater camp, Staged Manor, and that was a really big help for me, because I met my manager there, and I met kids that were in New York City who were going to performing art high schools, and I was able to come kind of going to the city every weekend and take acting classes. And then my manager was a huge piece of it, because she wanted me to go to college. I mean, she encouraged me to get an education. And so I in a way, I kind of thought, okay, well, it worked in high school, it's fun, so let me go and try it in college, and then I'll see what happens then. And then I got to college, and I was like, okay, well, this is fun. And then I booked my first job, professional job, which was the Law and Order thing. And then I was like, oh, this is fun. And then I moved to the city. So I kind of only tried to look at what's the closest next thing, rather than, this massive, oh, I have to do this for the rest of my life. I try to just kind of see as far as I could see, rather than, and of course you're always romanticizing things, but
yeah, I think that's the trap. Even, when we talk about it, I don't want to say, what were your dreams back then? What were you thinking? But I am curious, at that point in your career, what's the drive to get to the next thing? What is because there are hundreds of stories for every person who was successful. This person who was like, not for me. I won't go for the next audition. What is the early drive to get to that next place?
I think it's interesting. I think you have to really pay attention to yourself. There are many times where, I mean, I didn't mind auditioning. I mean, I still have to, like, it's not like it's done, but I didn't mind auditions. Sometimes though, I look back at those early years, and I sometimes go, oh, it felt a little simpler in a way, because it was just about getting a job. It was just, we were just trying to get something somewhere. It didn't matter what it was or who or where or what. And I think as you get lucky and you work more and you explore certain things, it gets a little more specific. And each time you go, well, I don't want to keep doing that thing. I want to try and find something else that challenges me. And then that's a whole other headache. And, but in the early stages, I think it was just, look, I mean, like every typical actor, I grew up with movies, and I romanticized actors and scenes and movies, and I was, I guess, in a way, always curious. It felt like an opening of a door in a way for me, in terms of just, I was born in Europe and I came to America and I had to learn English, and there was a lot of those years between 8 and 12 and 13 and 14, when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, where I was learning how to communicate and relate to people, and it was very difficult for me. And so in a way, acting and someone just giving you a scene and giving you lines felt like sort of this weird pass to kind of be allowed to sort of communicate, so in a way, if that makes sense. It wasn't, there was something about it that was like, oh, I don't have to think about how to be. I could, like, there's a scene telling you be this way. I was like, oh, and for some reason that really felt natural to me or something. But I think it also that I just, nothing else made sense to me. I never really had a plan B and stuff. And I know always people say have a plan B. And by the way, I don't know how you would do it today. I look at sort of how it happens now. You've got online. I mean, I used to make VHS tapes in New York, literally. Like, I would tape on a camcorder, then I have to go to my manager's office, plug a cord. That's how old I am now. Like, into her VCR, put a VHS tape, transfer it off the camcorder, and then she'd have to FedEx my audition to LA. Like, I don't, now you have TikTok, you have YouTube, you have Instagram, you have all these other ways of kind of getting your work out there. I wouldn't even know how to do it like now. But I guess back then it was, you know, it felt like every audition was an opportunity to, whether you got the job or not, to kind of keep going. And I didn't have, it was like, I don't know what else to do. Like, this is the only thing that really feels good.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. It's changed. You know, we, even at Backstage, you know, we were a magazine that was only in New York. Now we're talking to people on TikTok.
We're everywhere. Yeah, I always remember Backstage. I always remember. I remember leafing through Backstage even before I even had representation. I'd go to like the back, like, you know, look at the casting notices, and then I had to get the Ross report. Remember that?
Yeah, absolutely.
The Ross report had every single like agency and like agent, casting director, and I remember my mom and I actually took 3 days one time to put these headshots into these envelopes, and we mailed them to each casting office from that Ross report. But Backstage was a great one because you could actually, even if you didn't have an agent, you could kind of go straight to it.
It's funny because me and you, we keep saying, you know, it's easy to romanticize it, and this is the romantic ideal of a struggling actor in the beginning. You know, you're cutting out clips, you're making VHS tapes. I'm curious, did it feel romantic at the time, or was it just pure work? Or were you like, wow, this is it, this is what it is to be an actor?
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny. I just read today on IMDb that Liz Sheridan died at 93. Do you know who that was? Sheridan, Seinfeld's mom, most notably. But Liz Sheridan had been around for a long time, and she used to be a dancer, and she wrote this book called Lizzie and Jimmy, or Jimmy and Dizzy. Dizzy and it's a book about her relationship with James Dean in the 50s in New York City. Yeah, sort of when he was unknown, and she was struggling to be a dancer, and he was going out on auditions. And I remember reading that book when I was like 17 or 18, and this was before I got to Rutgers, and I had a girlfriend who was at NYU, and I would like take the train and then go pick her up at like Cap 21, and I'd be like, oh, like, you know, this is what they did. I mean, so when I mean romanticize, you know, sometimes romanticizing is that book was so great because it was like, here's about someone who was so famous, or somebody who had catapulted so much, but then you got to see a little bit of, as told through her eyes, the struggle. And for some reason I always ended up kind of drifting towards biographies, and I would just pick up like anything I could on actors, and just so I could understand the struggle that they had, and just to remember that the struggle is really a part of it. I mean, sometimes you're really lucky, you just knock it out of the park, you know. I mean, I remember that story, people saying about the incredible Mark Ruffalo, that he had gone on like 100 auditions or something before he booked his first job. I mean, all that stuff, like, I think adds up to it. But for me, it would kind of give me strength, because it would just sort of be like, okay, this is the way of the way. So you just rejection and saying, hearing no and struggling and whatever, it's all part of the deal.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned Mark Ruffalo, and you talk about his talent now, and it's undeniable. People would say, of course, but there's a wake of 100 people who were like, I don't see anything in that. You just need that one foot in the door. It's a
Yeah, and it's
cliche
and a
for a
lot
reason.
of luck. There's a lot. What I've learned is a lot of luck, and like a lot of the definition of luck, which somebody said, is preparation meets luck equals success, or whatever, or something. But it's about, you're preparing yourself for this moment that may or may
Yeah,
not happen, and then sort of hopefully when that moment happens, then it goes well.
it's kind of like, I don't know. You can't just wait for things to go right. You have to be practicing in between the no's. So when you get those yeses, the yeses mean something.
I think the danger now is you have to be selective with who you want to compare yourself to.
Mm-hmm.
Comparing yourself is inevitable. It's just inevitable. I think the social media world, for better or worse, has sort of made it more difficult to be in the moment, but also to feel grateful with what you have. If you go down that rabbit hole, then nothing's ever good enough, no matter what you do or you have. So we didn't have that. I didn't have that growing up, and I was lucky about it, because I think it's hard now. If you're a kid, if you're 15, you're 16, you want to be an actor, and you're spending your time always looking at what everybody else is doing, trying to be like other people, trying to kind of conform, then you're not going to find that path. You're not going to find the thing that's going to set you on your own, because the thing that's going to set you on your own is to be different. And to be different means you have to find a way to not compare yourself, or not try to please people, or not try to do what everybody likes. And that's a tough thing now, I think, much more because we're just all so thrown together by social media. But, or if you are going to compare yourself, then pick your favorite actors or actresses and just kind of follow them in a way.
Yeah, it's hard. It's almost like it's hard to be to become an actor and to become a successful actor.
It's hard, but at the same time, everybody's an actor now.
Yeah. I mean, what
I
is
mean,
what is this?
yeah,
What is
like
this conversation
TikTok.
if not a little bit of
Well,
acting?
yes. I mean, of course, because I don't know, you could be like thinking about what you're going to be doing on Good Friday. And you won't tell me that. Like, but yes, there's that. But I just mean also, I feel that there's so much, you're putting content out there again, like you're
Hmm.
making a video, even though it's you, there's a degree of acting like there's almost so much acting happening that's like, we don't even know what is good acting, like, or what
Yeah,
is
yeah.
acting. And I think it's good and bad, because on the one hand, I think it's good because you have a lot of opportunities now. There's a lot more work. There's a lot more opportunities to be able to, avenues to take from the streaming world to, and so that's the good part about it. It's always a pro and a con.
Yeah. Well, I guess the challenge is, separating yourself from that noise. There's a lot of noise, and so it's like the goal becomes, okay, how do you stand out from this sort of tornado of content that there is just everywhere?
Yeah, or staying curious enough and asking yourself, like, why are you even doing it to begin with? I think that's
Hmm.
important. Kind of remind yourself. If your why isn't big enough, you won't stick with it.
When you sort of look back on your career, the beginning, the middle, where you are now, years in the future, how has that why changed for you? How is your sort of driving force evolved over the years? From, you mentioned, in the early days it was about getting a job. When did it become about more than getting a job? When did it become about more than that?
I think when you get to work and people see your work, and then you're lucky to have interactions with people that have seen your work, and sometimes they're communicating to you how your work has impacted them for the better in a
Hmm.
way, or helped them realize something, or helped them change something in their life, or take a step towards something that they were afraid in taking, or getting out of a toxic thing, or whatever it may be. Then it sort of starts coming around, in a way, and in a way that feels the most gratifying, because at its core, it's really about communication, and that's what storytelling has always been since the get-go. And that's why we have to, I think, walk a fine line in terms of how critical we are of storytelling, because to some extent it is ingrown from when we were in caves, right? To paint on things like, and I might be biased here because, like I said, when I came to this country and I was learning English, and I wasn't able to communicate as well as I wanted to, and some conversations I wished I had been lucky enough to have with my parents that I couldn't, in a way, all of that sort of, I got a fix from the movies I was watching. I learned a lot about people from movies, and I learned a lot about good and bad. And so I look at it as a means of raising questions, sometimes uncomfortable, but again, making us aware and trying to acknowledge that we're all not perfect people, and we have flaws, and human beings are capable of beautiful, incredible things, and empathy, something that we cannot ever forget, but at the same time, serious destruction and incredible lack of like care about anyone else's well-being. And I think sometimes there's actually still in my head, I guess, something noble about this, because in a way that's how I look at it. The why for me became kind of, I'm just trying to kind of reflect truth around us, good and bad or whatever, and just be part of the conversation and the dissecting of what this is and what does it mean. And as long as, what are we doing here? Like, why are we making the choices that we're making, and why are we deciding to be kind to this person and awful to this person? And so, and I think movies still manage to do that. They don't always have to, and sometimes it can also just be escapism in the form of, which is a hug of some sort. You don't always want to go to the movies to learn the biggest lesson of your life, but it's nice to have a choice. And then sometimes you want to go on a ride too, and that's okay too. And so I guess it's just about, in a way, being, hopefully passing on some kind of, being part of an education or of the self, but by that also passing it on to others.
Yeah, there's that Roger Ebert quote I love about how movies are empathy machines, where you sit there and then you're just in another life for 90 to 2 hours. It's
yeah. I mean,
where else
that's
do you
why
get that?
I know, and that's why I hope that we don't kind of dismiss the movie theater experience, because especially now that we have phones and it's everywhere, you're sitting at home. I mean, it takes great effort for you to put that phone away for 2 hours. I mean, sometimes I would have to set a timer and say, oh, the movie 2 hours and 21 minutes. I'm going to start it now, and I'm not going to look at it until I finish this movie. But that's a lot of work. Like, whereas sometimes in the theater where you're with other people, because we so pick up on what everyone else is doing around us, you get to sit back and no one's on their phone. You're not going to be on your phone, and then you have that experience a little bit, and you kind of go on that ride. But it's, if you're just at home always watching something and then you go back to your phone, you pick it up, you go back, like you're breaking that train of thought. You're not going to get what the thing's meant to give you.
And that's something that I've had conversations with people who, they're not very concerned with the craft of acting. And I try and tell them that if you're not looking at a performance, you're missing so much of it, because it's so much of the performance is not just what you hear, it's what the person is not saying, it's what the person is
yeah. And I mean, and I think it depends. I mean, movies have constantly been changing, and that's one of the great things about it, is sort of that it's an evolving thing. It's not just one defined thing, but we should always look at kind of like all movies as they've gone, and what can we take from them, what have we learned from them, and how are they evolving now. And I still believe that it doesn't matter how much technology there is, if you're watching someone who's honestly experiencing something in that moment, your attention will be on them.
To keep returning to the idea of romanticizing something, I think the movie theater experience is something that it's kind of like second nature to me. You talk about it, you go into a movie theater and maybe the floors are sticky and people are like, oh, this is what you like to romanticize. But the idea of it, the fact that you said the screen is bigger than you and it's it's sort of you're submitting to it is that's a very romantic notion to me. And you do miss some of that when you watch a movie at home. There's just no denying that.
It's true. But look, I mean, there's something nice sometimes about, being
I mean,
on
look, I've seen a lot of movies at home. Don't get me wrong.
look, I know. And again, as soon as it looks like we're going that way, but as soon as it becomes a little bit safer to do so, then I think we can't give that up. But again, there needs to be certain things about movies that want to bring you to that big experience. It's going to be different for everybody. I mean, if you're a movie buff like you are, myself, then we're going to go there for everything. But then there's certain people that are like going to want to go, oh, I want to go see, a Ridley Scott movie or whatever, or something, because that's going to be an epic experience. That like the IMAX. There's a lot of things that can go into it.
Right before this, I was reading the conversation, the printed conversation you were having with Margot Robbie. I forget the publication, but it was you guys were in conversation. Yeah, or something like that.
Yeah, sorry, L'Official. Yeah.
Yes. You were mentioning that, something that you think about once you get to the physical part of the character is being self-conscious about, I think the phrase you used is Sebastianisms, the thing that make you, which is in direct contrast to being a character. I'm curious about that, because I think it's interesting that to morph into something else, you kind of have to unlearn what makes you. And I'm curious how you start that process.
I don't know. I mean, the thing is, I look at some of the most amazing actors in the world, right? Of all time, Robert De Niro, Daniel Day-Lewis. I mean, I wonder if at some point, Al Pacino, I wonder if sometimes there's only, and this is, I'm not speaking about them and saying this, but I just, having watched so many of their incredible performances, I wonder if they have the awareness of that I'm questioning about myself, which is like, hey, at some point, how many different performances can you give before there's just been so much of you that's been accessed or shared in various different ways that it's inevitable that you're going to have certain kind of isms, right? In a way. I do think I'm always seeking in a way to find, again, because I am very self-conscious of my stuff, of breaking away from that. But I also can understand that I think to some extent you won't, there's certain things you just won't be able to do. You will be a version of you to some extent, and it's not like you're going to become an entirely different person. I believe it was Philip Seymour Hoffman that always talked about this. I think he talked about it in The Master when he was doing that movie, The Master. It was just, what you're kind of trying to do is you're trying to gravitate towards a certain essence and find a way to understand what you have in common with the character and what you don't have in common with the character. And I think once you figure out those two things, then you sort of go, and you can accept that, then you kind of start to see what you can work with and what you might have to study or, go out there and research and figure out, because it's just not part of your thing. There are certain roles where it could be easy to sort of just kind of do the same thing. And then there's other things that kind of feel like real far swings. And those for me are always now as I've gotten older, the more interesting stuff that kind of really terrifies me. And then I go, okay, I don't know anything about that. So I want to go and figure that out now in some way. And it's that curiosity that terrifies me, but then really energizes me, because I think fear is a big component of sort of sometimes jumping into something, as opposed to, I guess, something, reading a script where you go, oh, I know how to do this. I can just go to work tomorrow and do it now, my eyes closed. So, but the isms, it just depends on kind of like what those characters demand. I mean, I guess if you're playing a real person, then there's already something that you have to kind of like figure your way towards. If you're playing a fictional person, then maybe you're inventing mannerisms or you're inventing certain things that may or may not help, that makes sense. But you're always kind of going to that ground zero, like I said, which is what do I have in common here? What do I actually understand about what's going on, and what do I not understand? And at least like knowing what you have to work towards, I suppose.
Where between, action and cut, where does that part of you that is like, I don't know how to do this, this isn't me, where does that go? How do you sort of turn off the voice in your head that's 100% you?
Well, you never really, right? Like you never really. I mean, I think the best experiences I've ever had were usually when like your gut and your head are connected.
Mm-hmm.
You can't walk into a scene only just emotional, because then all you're seeing is just like erratic emotions. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a character drifts more towards the emotion, like is more emotional than other characters. That's one thing, but you still have to, I think, have sort of this bird's eye view. It's like a third eye kind of keeping watch of what's going on. That's also just being responsible.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there's nothing worse than seeing an actor just being like, I'm in the character. It's me, and like, and like, and you're like, you're just vomiting all over the place. Like,
Yeah.
there's a degree of respect that we have to have when you walk in there to go, hey, like, I'm gonna go to toe with you 100%, but we got each other. Like, you're safe. Like, we're gonna figure this out. Like, I don't believe in creating chaos for the purposes of self, kind of, it translates. And I know actors do that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that do that, create sort of chaos on set or chaos in the other people that they're working with in order to sort of somehow give the scene this tension or whatever. But to me, that just reads like a very irresponsible, narcissistic kind of self-indulgent thing. It just reads like, I'm afraid and I just want to torture everyone else because of it. But anyway, but I think it starts off way before action, and it starts off before you get to set. It starts off sometimes the night before.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that was what I was. That's why I was trying to phrase it correctly, because I was like, I'm not suggesting that you're just a vehicle for the character, and you're gone. I don't want to verge into like philosophy, sci-fi territory where I'm like, where do you go?
No,
Where do you
I don't
go?
know, because there's things like, for example, on stage, there are moments certainly when something happens, and it's very seldom that you on stage, for example, because you can't yell cut, you can't get out of there, you can't walk out of there. It really does feel like you're just on this dream. You're just in a dream, and somehow then 2 hours go by and you come out and you kind of go, what just happened, or where did that really just happen? And there's sometimes when you go home at night from a long day and of shooting, and you have that feeling too of sort of, wow, that went really well. But even the best nights on stage I've ever had, I always had another piece up here that was aware of the awareness that came with the character, going, wow, this is like really working right now. Or this is, I'm getting a good instinct. I'm getting I think you need a degree of that, even though you may have certain flashes or moments where you're just so in the moment that nothing else matters.
Yeah, all that character building stuff is so fascinating. And I think it's especially fascinating as I watch, Pam and Tommy, in which you're playing a very real person. I think what I found really impressive about this performance, especially, is how you, and this is interesting just for anyone who's playing a real person, how you picked up the quirks of a real person, that sort of the ticks of a real person, because by definition, someone's ticks aren't voluntary. So I'm curious how you go about learning someone else's involuntary actions.
Well, I think that part of it feels a lot more like kind of learning an instrument,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense you just have to keep practicing. You have to willingly practice things almost in a self-conscious way. You're learning the piece of music to the degree that you're going to play without thinking about it. And that I've only found in terms of Pam and Tommy, it was just, there was so much. I would just keep listening over and over and over again to how he spoke in these recordings, and I keep watching, and then I'd walk around and just like almost hear him talk, and try to talk with him as I was talking, and you're just doing that over and over again all day long until like one day you're ordering a coffee and you realize you're like, oh, you just did the thing. You just went into this thing and it came out of nowhere. You weren't aware of it. You weren't thinking, because you can't, I think when you get aware of it, then, and you are for a good portion. I mean, like I said, it's a repetitive mechanical process that I feel is just, there's no fast way to get to it, at least for me, unless I just try and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until I'm talking and I'm just doing things. It's just happening, you know? And by the way, I don't know if you see this, but we do this naturally when we're have you heard of being with a partner and mirroring? You know, you're around a certain person, or you're with a buddy all the time, or you're with a friend that you're constantly seeing every day. You actually start, or I start to like actually pick up their thing. And so it's actually a very natural process.
When you're playing someone, a fictional character, are you essentially trying to mirror someone who's not there? Are you trying to pick up the quirk? Do you have to sort of build the character in your mind and then, you know, step into their shoes?
Well, so it starts with the script. Everything starts with the script. I mean, you kind of look at the actions of what the character actually does. And that's what you always ask yourself. It's not what they say, it's much more what they do. And then I think you start to ask questions as to why they're doing the things that they're doing. And again, we're talking about fictional characters now, not and when you don't have the backstory, and then you have to kind of create a backstory, but the backstory I'm going to be creating will be probably very different than the backstory you'll create, because I have another set of things that will inspire me that will be very different than for you. You might be thinking of, I don't know, some song from 10th grade when you asked a girl out and she said no, and you remember that song, and every time you hear that song, it just puts you in that place where you were around 10 other kids who watched you get rejected by this person. And then that's what that song generates for you. And guess what? Playing that song before you do that scene actually is informing you in some way to go do the scene. I mean, it just depends, because I guess what you're doing is, and this is where it gets fun, I think, is you're reading the script and you're going like, okay, what's the most fun way? What's the most exciting way to play the scene? Exciting meaning what will generate the most behavior in a way, rather than me just walking on there. And then I guess you have to kind of, and this is all, by the way, Mason Gross. I mean, this is Mason Gross, and this is Larry Moss, a teacher I've had for years, who I credit every time, as I should. And he's the greatest. And if anyone really wants to learn acting, you got to just buy his book, The Intent to Live. I mean, it's just, he spells it out clearer than I could ever say it. But it's finding the things that are meaningful to you and applying them in a way, even if they're very different from the script, you know, finding the right quality fabric of emotion or reaction that is applicable to what the script demands or asks for. And then how you get there is sort of the fun.
So in that sense, when you're preparing to play Tommy Lee, again, a real person, are you sort of boiling the character of Tommy Lee down to, you know, a character sense, and then you're playing your version of Tommy Lee? Because I think that the goal is to not do just an imitation. So are you essentially seeing what Tommy Lee, the concept of Tommy Lee means as a character, and then you're playing that? Or is it a million?
I don't think when you're playing scenes, you can really think of concepts. It's almost too esoteric at that point. I think when you get down to a scene or a moment, it really has to be just about what is actually happening in the scene. What are you doing to the other partner? What is the other partner doing to you? What idea, I'm quoting Larry Moss 100%. What ideas are you sending to the other character? I want you to have the idea that you should be terrified of me. I want you to have the idea that I would die if you left me. I want you to have the, you know, whatever. It's again, you have to go back to the script but you can't at this point. At that point, for me, it was really not even weirdly. If I went into every scene thinking of him as a real person that existed, I just would never have been able to do the job.
Mhm.
I spent a month and a half, 2 months worrying every night about playing a real person until I got to set. And then I just said, F it. Like what's there is going to be there. What isn't. And to some degree, I think if you allow yourself the time to prepare enough, then you will have enough confidence to sort of think that, okay, like I'm coming here with something. But I think in the case of Pam and Tommy, again, it's a marriage of things. The scripts were so great that the clues for where we needed to go were in the script. The dialogue, the beats, whether it was at times the bravado or the vulnerability or sort of the frustration, all of that was in the script. And then I think what you do, if it's a well-written script like we had them, you're just spending months before you shoot. Because to me, I think the most important time is always before you shoot. That's the trickiest time, where you're least confident, where all the demons are in your head, where you're questioning things, where you're trying things out, you're failing, then you're figuring out this works. It's like this weird trial period. And then you basically arm yourself as much as you can with as much as you've learned about somebody, or if it's a non-fictional character, as much as backstories you've created, as many memories or things you have vented about this person, that when you get there on that day, you will be inspired in that moment, in that scene. Something will come through, and it will come through naturally, as opposed to you forcing it in there.
This is fascinating how you build a character. I'm curious when it comes to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which you have been in since, I believe, 2011, where you're not only building a character, you are coming back to a character repeatedly. I'm curious how that has affected you as an actor and affected your performance when you're like, okay, I'm here's a character I built. Here he is 2 years down the line. Here he is 3 years down the line. You have to find new angles and stuff like that.
Well, again, it's almost like it's just a bigger version of that first thing we started with, which is bring your day with you. In the sense of 10 years, it's like you bring life with you. And when you play the character for 10 years, as is the case here, it's inevitable that the character will grow as you're growing. And I think you can see that with a lot of the characters in the Marvel world, that they've shifted in certain ways as the actors have shifted as well. And that's something very unique. And I think it can actually land in such a more meaningful and impactful and profound way on an audience who has also grown up with the characters and the actors. It's like a weird symmetry, kind of, which is why when you had those Avengers movies, it was so insane. But it was insane also not because they were incredibly well written, directed, and produced, and Kevin's unbelievable kind of brain holding it all together for years, but it was also just this lead up of 10 years of experiencing these people. And I think, yeah, when you're going back to a character like that, I think you do get, it is a little bit like riding a bike, meaning there's certain things that have always been there, and they've sort of solidified more, and it's easy to jump in. And then you're going, oh, I'm in a point in my life where I've learned certain things, and then you learn and see how you can apply that to the characters in a way. And fortunately over there, it's been very collaborative, and I think that they've always welcomed us kind of bringing our lives to, in a sense of how we've grown up with the characters. I think it's inevitable. You just get that from playing over time the same part.
Yeah, I'm
Look
curious.
at Indiana Jones. Look at Harrison Ford. I mean,
he's filming it right now, I think. All these
yeah,
years later,
like,
he's doing
it's like,
another one.
You're like, he's giving you that look that you've seen for like 25 years, but in that look now is a man who has faced so many things. And so it's like, it's wild.
Yeah, since that's sort of been, you've done so much interesting work, like, Pam and Tommy, fresh, all the way back to, Destroyer and I, Tonya. And then there's been the MCU, which is equally interesting work that's been the constant. And I'm curious, have you thought at all what it will mean for you, for your process artistically, when hypothetically there is no more Bucky Barnes to go back to, when you don't have him as the constant?
Yeah, I have and I haven't. I mean, I think it will be weird for sure. It is weird already. It's weird every time because every time it could be an ending in a way, and you treat it like an ending. And I think it's always going to be about what else is there to explore with that character. And there are more capable people than me that can answer that, and that can but that's not to say that I don't have certain things that I'd like to explore, or certain things that I'd like to see more of. And I still do feel like there's a lot left there to kind of still unpack. Definitely had quite a journey so far, but absolutely, I mean, there'll be a time where I think might be too old to might be too old to do any of those stunts to begin with. But yeah, when that happens, it will happen. I mean, it was just, but I don't know. Harrison Ford is still
I
playing.
was gonna say Harrison Ford is putting the hat on as we speak, so
I don't know what that means. Bucky Barnes, you never know.
screwing the arm back on. Yeah, I would love to wrap this up. Going back to, what you said about being in Mason Gross and then graduating and, putting the VHS tapes together and really just thinking about going from job to job. I'm curious, when you look back on that, what is the advice from 2022 for that, Sebastian Stan? What is the advice that you have for that period of your life?
I would say just don't, and I don't take things so personally. It's a really hard thing. If you're asking me to tell that to my 20-year-old self, that's what I would say. Don't take things so personally. And it's a very tricky thing because it's like your job as an actor is to understand what you take personally. You're trying to understand yourself. And you, like my acting teacher at Mason Groves, Kevin Kittle, once said, you guys should go home, write these lists, make a list of 10 things you love, like absolutely love, not just like, oh, I love this movie. Like, what do you love? What do you hate? What are you scared of? What pisses you off? Because it's important. You have to know yourself. And that's why I think if done right, this could be a great way of learning about oneself. But I would probably say don't take things so personally. And that's hard. Like, as I said, you're always trying to figure things out. But if you don't get a job, it's not necessarily because you're a bad actor. It's not necessarily because you're not good looking enough, or you're not weird looking enough, or by the way, it's always going to be something. Even when you get the jobs, they're still going to go, I don't see it. Like you're like, it's like that movie Tootsie, when he goes on there, dusting off, and he's like, I can be this, I can be that. And you're like, I know what I can do, but then the other people like don't. I had an amazing director the other day. He didn't say this to me, he told it to my agent. Huge guy, pitching me for this one role. And he's like, yeah, but Sebastian's like always like very confident, cool, the guy who walks in the room. And little does he know that I'm actually a very neurotic hypochondriac person as well. But it's just, again, there's so much going into getting a job, and not timing is a huge thing. Sometimes it is someone taking a shot on you. Sometimes it is about they need to see you do it. Sometimes there's multiple amounts of money that has to go into the project that has nothing to do with you, that falls apart and you didn't get the job. It's not the universe necessarily. It's not. So I guess find a way to do this for yourself without taking it personally.
Well,
that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense to me. That is unfortunately our time. But this was a pleasure. This flew by, and
Absolutely, man. Thank you. I enjoyed talking with you. Very, very thoughtful questions. I appreciate it.
of course. And until next time, thank you.
All right. Happy Easter. Happy weekend.
Happy Friday. Happy whatever.
Happy Friday. Exactly.
Happy life. Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man. All right. Bye.
Thanks, as always, to our brilliant producer, Jamie Muffett, and to the whole team at Backstage.